when a Marine had an RPG in his leg. The military is known for its strict adherence to rules, policies designed to keep its members alive in the worst of conditions and to maintain discipline and order in chaotic circumstances. Sometimes, however, those on the battlefield disregard these rules in order to save the lives of their comrades. On January 12, 2012, a U.S. Army medical evacuation crew were ordered on what everyone thought was a routine flight. They were in Afghanistan, supporting the coalition effort in the region, flying dust-off missions, airlifting the wounded to field hospitals for treatment. At the start of their flight, they had been briefed that a young Afghan girl had been wounded in the fighting and was in need of an airlift. Once the Black Hawk helicopter received clearance to land, however, they were greeted with quite a different scenario. Instead of an Afghan girl in need of aid, the wounded individual was 22-year-old U.S. Marine Lance Corporal Winder Perez. It wasn't a normal battlefield injury that made this situation unusual. Instead of a mundane bullet or shrapnel wound, something more substantial and far more concerning awaited them. "The patient has unexploded ordnance," shouted the landing zone controller as the helicopter touched down. Once on the ground, the first member of the crew to make contact with the patient was Specialist Mark Edens. Greeting him was the wounded Perez, who had a 2-foot-long, unexploded, rocket-propelled grenade jutting precariously from his leg, extending up to his abdomen. "That call will be in my mind all my life," said Specialist Robert Hardesty, crew chief on the helicopter. "First you land thinking it's a little girl, and the next thing it's a Marine with an unexploded RPG embedded in his body." The ubiquitous RPG-7 is a Soviet-designed shoulder-fired rocket launcher, first manufactured in the early 1960s. In spite of its long service life, the weapons platform is inexpensive, costing between $500 to $2,000 per launcher. It's also lightweight, versatile, and readily available, making it the weapon of choice for insurgents and other underfunded fighting forces, and the most commonly used anti-armor weapon in the world. Many of these pieces found in Afghanistan are leftovers from the Soviet occupation of the country in the 1980s, though there is an active arms market through which these weapons can also be acquired. There are numerous warheads that can be launched from the RPG-7, including a myriad of anti-armor rockets, as well as anti-personnel fragmentation warheads. The AP rounds can penetrate upwards of 750 millimeters, or around 2.5 feet of armor. During its long service life, the RPG-7 is responsible for shooting down more helicopters than most man-portable air defense weapons. When the medevac crew spotted Perez, they had to make a difficult choice. Military regulations strictly forbid the transport of patients with unexploded ordnance for obvious safety reasons. With the warhead jutting precariously from Perez's leg, even the slightest movement could set it off, with disastrous results. Though the weapon had not detonated, a delayed reaction was still possible, sending a concussive blast and shrapnel from meters in all directions. When informed of the situation, Medevac Captain Kevin Dew called for a vote from the rest of the crew. He was only willing to take Perez in his current condition if he received a unanimous vote in favor of airlifting the wounded Marine. He was unwilling to risk his crew or his helicopter unless there was universal approval from everyone on board. Without hesitation, all of the medical crew agreed, and soon Perez was quickly yet gingerly loaded onto the waiting Black Hawk. "There was no doubt to anyone that we were going to take this Marine and get him the medical attention needed to save his life," said Dew. What happened next was an agonizing 11-minute flight from the pickup location to a field hospital located at Forward Operating Base Edinburgh, one in which even the slightest bump could spell disaster. After Lance Corporal Perez was loaded on the Black Hawk, it was a total of 11.2 minutes of flight time where every minute felt like an hour, said Dew in a later interview. When dealing with this, not knowing that any movement could be your last, 18 inches from the patient's legs was about 360 gallons of aviation fuel. Should the warhead detonate in the close confines of the helicopter, there would be virtually no hope of survival, and the Black Hawk would go down in a fiery wreck. During the flight, medic Mark Edens and crew chief Robert Hardesty worked quickly to stabilize the wounded Marine, keeping him alive while also not jarring the embedded rocket, while Captain Dew was coordinating with personnel on the ground at nearby FOB Edinburgh, including medical staff and explosive ordnance disposal units, as well as keeping in contact with the medevac's escorts who were informed to keep a safe distance from the volatile Black Hawk. There was a risk that should the grenade detonate, the aviation fuel would also combust, sending shrapnel into the escorts, compounding the tragedy. Once they landed at the forward operating base, they were met at the landing zone by Navy Lieutenant Commander James Gennari, who was head of the surgical company at FOB Edinburgh, and Army EOD Staff Sergeant Ben Summerfield. The other staff at the FOB were kept at a safe distance to minimize casualties should the grenade detonate. Without giving a second thought to the danger, Gennari held Perez's hand and administered pain medication to the still conscious Marine as Summerfield went to work. The EOD tech took a firm hold of the projectile and firmly pulled 3 times before it finally came free from his leg. "Well, the truth of it is, I said a prayer and I thank God for everything I had," Gennari later told a news outlet of the incident. "Whether or not the grenade was going to blow up, I left it to him, and I just worried about keeping the Lance Corporal's airway open. I think the reason that I did it, I didn't give it more than a thought or two, but I knew that I'm sent out there by the Marine Corps to save lives, and he was in danger, and I looked at it as my duty and job to go do that." In one of the most dramatic photos of the war in Afghanistan, a photographer, peering from behind the safety of a sandbag barricade, captured the image of Gennari holding Perez still as Summerfield pulled the rocket from his leg. Once the unexploded round was safely out of the way, Gennari and the rest of FOB Edinburgh's medical staff went to work on their patient. While Summerfield and Gennari were working on Perez, the rest of the medical staff was not idle. They were making the necessary preparations to treat the wounded Marine. Once the scene was made safe, they sprang into action, providing what aid they could to the shocked Perez. Perez's wounds were so severe that in Summerfield's estimation, he would have died had he not received prompt medical attention. Once in a stable condition, and the infamous RPG now far away from Perez, he was cleared for transport for intensive medical care at Bastion Hospital, a more extensive medical facility able to provide more sophisticated treatment. Once again, Captain Dew piloted his Black Hawk, as Edens and Hardesty tended to Perez, though they no longer had to deal with the harrowing experience of their previous flight together. This trip was far from uneventful. An equipment malfunction caused Perez's ventilator to shut off, threatening to suffocate him. Edens and Hardesty both worked calmly and professionally, manually providing oxygen to Perez, bringing him back to a stable condition. Once at Bastion Hospital, Perez was now under the care of more sophisticated medical facilities and was able to start the long road to recovery. Although a mere 24 minutes elapsed from the time Perez was hit by the RPG to his arrival at FOB Edinburgh, there is no doubt that the fast response of Captain Dew and the specialists Mark Edens and Robert Hardesty made the difference between life and death for the young Marine. This speed was only made possible by their willingness to put their own lives in danger and to disregard proper procedure to do what they felt was right.